China's economy slipped into deflation in July after consumer prices declined for the first time in more than 2 years. The consumer price index fell 0.3% year-on-year after having flatlined in June. A 26% drop in pork prices, which is a staple food in China, contributed to the overall decline, and producer prices, which have been mired in negative territory for the past 10 months, fell by 4.4%, while manufacturing activity has contracted for 4 consecutive months. That's set to put more pressure on the government to consider additional fiscal stimulus at a time when policymakers are also grappling with a property sector slowdown and weakness in trade. Let's get more on this now with Mark Humphrey-Jenner in Sydney. He's a financial analyst and faculty member at the University of New South Wales. Mark, thanks for joining us. Now, China has bucked the global inflation trend of many other large economies. Can you help us understand how China got here in the first place?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me. And you're absolutely right that China has deflation, whereas, well, almost everywhere else has inflation, and stubbornly high, persistently high inflation. So if we're looking at China, there's probably a few factors that are really driving the deflation at the moment. One of them is more benign, which is base effects. That is the idea that prices might have been incredibly high 12 months ago, so things like fuel, for example, and now those are normalizing, and when they're normalizing, it looks like there's deflation because prices are going back down toward normal. Now that's one of the good parts to some extent, a normalization. However, other aspects appear to be sluggish consumer demand, and that sluggish consumer demand has really arisen because during the pandemic, when people were under lockdowns, they didn't have that much financial support from the government. So people are feeling relatively poor at the moment. They feel like they don't have that much in the way of savings. So people aren't quite able to go out and spend as much as they have been, for example, in the United States, where people got significant stimulus checks. Furthermore, construction has been slowing down. And part of the reason for construction slowing down is simply a reduction in demand for housing, in part because the government has tried to tamp down on speculation, but also in part because, again, people are feeling less wealthy. And a part of this, for example, is in unemployment. So youth unemployment in China is above 20%, and it has been for a couple of readings now, and it only got worse in the latest reading, which suggests that there's a whole cohort of people that simply aren't employed and therefore simply don't have the financial resources to be able to go out and spend. And these factors are really behind the deflation that we're seeing. It's not good news.
Right, now what does this deflation in China mean for the rest of the world? Will low prices in China help abate price pressures elsewhere?
Certainly, the lower prices in China can help with price pressures elsewhere. So, for example, if there's less demand for goods in China, well, that could filter through into areas where there is global demand. Now, clearly, this will affect some things more than others. For example, if there's less construction demand in China, well, that would, for example, reduce global steel prices. If there's less general demand in China, so less transportation, less goods supply, and that type of thing, then fuel prices, again, could have some downward pressure. And we've seen some of this come into oil prices. So it can help to alleviate some of the inflation pressures throughout the world. However, on the other hand, it can also adversely affect growth in other parts of the world. So say, for example, we're looking at countries like Australia or very resource-intensive countries, or countries that just do a lot of exports to China. Well, for those countries, this now is going to harm them unless there's some form of stimulatory measure. So to give you an example there, China recently rolled back its tariffs on Australian barley. Those tariffs were 80.5%, a tariff that almost ground the trade to a halt. Now, China wound those back, reportedly in order to placate and perhaps stimulate domestic production. Now, that therefore, when you've got this policy intervention, can inadvertently help growth in other markets. But here is the policy intervention rather than the deflation that is really helping out growth.
Right, a lot to digest there. Mark Humphrey-Jenner, thank you for your analysis. Now to other top business stories from around the world. Cathay Pacific Airways has swung to a profit in the first half of 2023, thanks to a major turnaround in travel demand. The Hong Kong carrier earned $546 million in the first 6 months, compared to a loss of $640 million in the same period last year. The company has also announced plans to pay back $2.5 billion in government money it borrowed at the height of the pandemic. The New York-based shared workspace company WeWork has warned of substantial doubt surrounding its ability to remain operational over the next year. Following the announcement, the company's shares plummeted by 27%. Previously valued at $47 billion, WeWork has been severely impacted by challenging conditions in the tech sector and has not recorded any profits since October 2021. And Google and Universal Music are in discussion to license artists' melodies and voices for songs generated by artificial intelligence. The industry aims to control the rise of deepfake songs generated by AI, which is able to mimic the voices of established artists. No product has been announced yet, but the two companies have said they're working to develop a tool for fans to legitimately create AI-generated music.